again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our very good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how's it going?
I'm doing fantastic today, and I'm absolutely over the moon today because this morning we have on new friend of ours from Washington County, New York, famed writer, absolutely fantastic writer, has had a career kind of like I would love to have if I had to do it all over again. Worked at the Rolling Stone, has spoken to just about every single major university in the United States, has written any number of books, nonfiction and fiction. I got to tell you, I found out about Jim by reading a series that he did called The World Made by Hand, which is absolutely fantastic. Some people would call it dystopian. I would actually call it, I think in Jim's word, an enlightened 19th century, which is a lot of fun. And when I was reading it, it's kind of strange. I mean, it's set in Washington County, New York. And as I'm visioning the town, it's weird because I looked up Greenwich, Washington County, and that is exactly the way I envisioned it. So it's absolutely fantastic. Our special guest today is Jim Kunstler, and Jim is a master of all media, has a wonderful website, fantastic blog, has an absolutely fantastic podcast. We're just going to pick his brain for about 15 to 20 minutes right now, and I just want to introduce him today. And Jim, thank you so much for being on. We greatly appreciate your time.
Well, it's lovely to be here, and thanks for the kind compliments.
You're more than welcome. You absolutely deserve them. And so, being mindful of everyone's time, particularly Jim's here today, I'm just going to start off by just asking some basic questions. And Jim, I've noticed over the last several decades, there has been sort of an explosion in what I would call the volume of dystopian literature. And what is it that's so appealing about this to people these days? Could it be that people are looking at the world around them and saying, man, this isn't going to end so well?
I don't think it's that complicated, really. We've lived through an extremely turbulent several generations. This whole industrial orgy that started in around 1800 has been very disruptive to the human experience. And people are, I think, rather upset at having to live through such tumultuous changes. Yeah. And of course, that would that leads to the idea that people are now kind of anxious about what the next set of changes is going to be. Remember, for centuries, people lived from generation to generation, and life didn't change at all, and their circumstances didn't change at all. And that was not necessarily the best disposition of things, but it did provide a certain kind of psychological security about what the world was about. Yeah. And now our world is not just turbulent, but turbulent in a kind of a scary way that, so many things can go wrong, and they're big things.
Well, I mean, Jim, you bring up a ton of good points. And, one of the things that you mentioned and alluded to is just how life didn't change for centuries, really, in a lot of ways. The world was made up of largely subsistence farmers, yeoman farmers here in the United States. That's what Thomas Jefferson was actually envisioning in terms of the creation of our country. And I like to point out to people when I'm making economic presentations that my father's father was born in 1891. I'm 52 years of age. My grandfather was born in 1891. He was 12 years old before the Wright brothers even left the ground. And here I am, my grandchildren are going to see it. Heck, I'm going to see it myself when we finally put boots on places like Mars and what have you.
Just forget about that. That ain't going to happen.
Okay.
So well, you can check that one off of your bucket list. I mean, what's more impressive, as a matter of fact, is that the moon landing of the USA is now ancient history, and it looks like we're not going to do that again either. So, I would caution you to, get all lost in that transport.
Well, I wasn't going to go to Mars. I was just thinking maybe someone would, but that's a way down the road, just enormous amount of change. And Sam,
it's more likely that your great grandchildren are going to be walking behind a plow than they're going to be putting their boots on the planet Mars.
That would certainly be a change from what their great grandfather did for a living, sitting behind a desk working on
sitting in the takeout drive-in line at McDonald's.
No, I can't stand McDonald's. Arby's. Oh, okay. I do like Arby's. Now,
Sam,
what was it you were noticing last Friday about common sense?
It was our common sense article from last Friday. Began with an in-depth definition of doublethink, which was taken straight from the book 1984. And your blog, it seemed like last Friday, was "The Clock Struck 13," which is obviously an allusion to the first line of the same book.
Right.
So what is it about our society that leads people from Birmingham, Alabama, and New York to, both see and have these experiences, both thinking of 1984 on the same day?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. I think it amounts to what is the real animating principle of the American left these days. And, it's not so much redistributionism or some half-assed version of Marxism or communism or socialism. It's really more simple than that. It's the simple wish to coerce other people and punish them, and to do it without mercy and without forgiveness, and to do it sadistically. Because I think that a great deal of what's going on the left is the sadistic pleasure they get out of canceling people's careers and reputations. And, and if you notice how it works, it doesn't matter how many times you apologize for whatever that concocted crime you committed was, you will not be forgiven. So it's a movement that really does not deserve any respect from us. And I consider myself the enemy of that movement, which I also consider to be sort of a new version of the Jacobinism that erupted in 1793 in the French Revolution. So I'm the enemy of that movement. I am bending every effort I can to defeat it.
Well, I tell you what, Jim, if you ever run into any sort of hot water up in New York, by all means, I think you could find a very welcome home down here in Alabama.
Yeah, well, this is a pretty welcome place.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 200 miles away from the cities, so in three directions: Montreal, Boston, and New York.
Listen, you're up there in God's country, right on the border near Vermont. It's got to be absolutely beautiful this time of year. Absolutely beautiful. Now, one of the things, kind of shifting gears a little bit, and this has been kind of fun for us here down doing what we do for a living, managing people's wealth and doing portfolio management. We are taking a look at global markets and taking a look at global monetary policy. And you touched on this in the World Made by Hand series about how the explosion in debt and just the sheer explosion in the amount of this worthless paper money that we have become addicted to ultimately leads to part of the collapse in overall society and economy. Just if we have so much paper money, we give it all this value, and then almost when we realize it's absolutely worthless. So in your series, I found it kind of fun that the primary method of exchange, the monetary exchange, if you will, were pre-1964 coins. Coins, small denomination coins here in the United States, because up until that point, we put about 90% silver content in our small change. And I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm thinking the same thing. I've got a couple of bags of what they call junk silver in my closet. I'm not going to tell you which closet, by the way. Yeah, okay. But it's in the closet.
Don't rob the house.
Yeah. And I've also got a bunch of silver dollars in my in any of that. Now, when you think about the future, doesn't it make sense to you that people would want to buy up some of this junk silver, buy up some of these precious metals, because at some point people are going to want to have some measure of exchange that has some sort of intrinsic worth?
Absolutely. And I'm walking the walk myself. I'm not going to go much further into that, but absolutely. And, somebody described financialization as money with all its value removed. And, what it'll come down to largely is, not what markets are doing, but what actually is money, and therefore what are the representations of money worth. So if money is credit, and credit alone, which seems to be the underlying ethos of modern monetary theory, and people stop paying their debt. I mean, remember, credit is a two-way street. There's the creditor and there's the debtor. And if the equation between them that works, with the debtor paying back his debts to the creditor, if that fails, credit is worthless. I mean, even as an idea, it has to include the idea that this mechanism works. Now, we're approaching a situation in the USA. First of all, there's what the Federal Reserve has done over the last 12 months, especially, piling untold trillions upon untold trillions of debt we've already accumulated. But come the new year and the end of December, we're facing the expiration of the mortgage and rent forbearance, which means that, people are either going to have to start ponying up for their rents and mortgage, or they're going to not have housing.
Yeah.
And but then again, if the government extends that, that's maybe nice psychologically for the people who don't have to pay for the place they live, but it thunders through the banking system. I mean, there are the landlords and the banks that are holding the mortgages that also have to pay their obligations. Yeah, and I guess that's the magic word, is obligation. A credit-based system is based on obligations. That is what I owe to you, what you owe to other people, and it's a chain. And if you break the chain, you break the economic system.
And it seems as if politicians on both sides of the aisle absolutely have forgotten that just because it doesn't cost the consumer anything, or there's no price to it.
Well, it seems not to.
That doesn't mean that there's not any cost to society. Someone's got to pick up the tab.
Yeah. And I got to add that this is kind of consistent with what I call my new theory of history, which is that things happen because they seem like a good idea at the time. Okay. It doesn't mean that they're good ideas. It's just, and often they're done out of desperation. So, there you go.
Well, I think all that is kind of a good segue into what I was thinking and what I was going to ask. And that is, even back to 2008 and really even before that, it seems like we've gotten to a point where there's kind of a distrust, and people, don't respect both public and private institutions. And I have a question, which is, why do you think that some people can both say that they think the government is failing and inefficient, however want to turn over more power or influence to them on the other side of the coin?
It may not be a matter of much more than classic cognitive dissonance, which is, the idea that, you have two ideas that cancel each other out in your brain. And that I would attribute to the generalized anxiety in our culture right now that arises out of the quandaries that we face. There are the real quandaries we face, like the energy quandary.
Mm-hmm.
The oil production is down by more than 2 million barrels a day since 2019, and probably heading lower. And scores of energy companies are going out of business and going bankrupt. Yeah. And that's a problem that we're not paying any attention to. And yet this is basically our economy is basically an energy system. It's not a stock and bond system. It's an energy system, and we're not paying attention to that. And I think all of that, and by the way, all of that failure is being expressed in the falling fortunes of the middle class in America. And that middle class is getting very desperate. I mean, now, there are far fewer people who are qualified borrowers who can even get a car the way that Americans are used to getting a car. So that whole system is failing. The mass motoring system is failing much more on the basis of finance now than it is even on energy. And so we have this set of quandaries that we face, and it generates tremendous energy. It's mostly experienced as people losing economic ground and falling through the cracks into the lower and lower classes. And it generates tremendous anxiety in people, and that generates conflicting ideas in their heads, cognitive dissonance. They have to process all the messages they get over media, which is enormous. The amount of screen time that people are plugged into one way or another, whether it's their phone or cable TV or some other thing, it's just overwhelming. And they're having ideas jammed into their heads, and I think it's very confusing. And it will probably lead to violence.
Jim, you bring up you're hitting all kinds of nails on all kinds of heads. And, we make a lot of economic presentations down here, and there are oftentimes I get asked in the Q&A section about the rising income inequality in the United States. What do I think about that? And it's always an open-ended question. And I said, listen, when we're calculating GDP, it's just a very simple C plus I plus G. And we can have the top 25%, top 10% of this country continue to grow at a massive rate like they have over the last 10 to 20 years. And the end result will be U.S. economy grows 2 to 3%. That's not the issue. our biggest problems moving forward are almost as much societal, because so many people in our society are feeling left behind. And when they turn on social media, they turn on the TV, they're seeing how the other halves, how they're living, and they're not moving ahead despite doing what they've been taught that they need to do in order to get ahead.
Yeah, and ironically, the way that works and has worked for like the last 20 years is more based on envy than grievance. You know, you get X number of million people tuned into Kim Kardashian, you know, watching her lavish and insane lifestyle, and that has been a kind of you know, success pornography of the last 20 years, and envy pornography. But when that turns to grievance pornography, which is what's happening now with Antifa and riots and BLM, and you know, what is about to kind of morph into an American version of the French Revolution, it's a much different matter when it turns from envy to grievance.
Yeah, and Sam and I've talked down here. I mean, watching 2020 unfold. Now, obviously, we've started off with the pandemic, but the severity of the riots that we've seen here in the United States, and the severity and the uptick of the just disquiet, I guess, if you will. I mean, Sam and I've been talking. I said, Sam, this has to do more than just BLM. This is a society that thinks it's getting screwed, and that is kind of what I have been telling folks. That's probably the first time I've gone public and actually said it like that. But that really is kind of, I think, underpinning a lot of the discord that we're seeing in the United States right now.
Yeah. Now, remember, you know, when the French Revolution happened, the lower classes of France, which, you know, were more than 90% of the population, and most of them living in, you know, rural situations, they were living in really pretty abject misery. The difference is in America is that we've been living in such extravagant and exorbitant comfort for so long, for like 3 generations, with things that you know, a French king would have envied 250 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, even the poorest people have hot and cold running water and air conditioning, and many of them have cars, and you know, they're, judging on the size of people, they're not going hungry, and yet you know, they're falling.
By the way,
you know, they see that stuff falling away, and especially the middle class people who have been responsible, paying their bills and trying to keep up with the expenses of living, and you know, making the car payment, making the house payment, paying for the insurance, paying their health insurance, and now all of that responsible behavior is being kind of negated, and they're falling nonetheless into an abyss. And that is really going to change things. The election that we're in at the moment is probably a very confusing one. And, you know, the idea that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden represent some kind of, you know, real redistributionist party is probably going to be mistaken. You know, a lot of the people who are on the losing end right now are turning to Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
And to some degree, that's understandable, although I don't think that there's any chance he's going to make America like 1958 again.
Yeah.
But you know, what we really face is the need to downscale and relocalize most of our activities and make them smaller, finer, better, and employ the people around us, and develop social and economic relationships with the people in our localities.
Yeah, and I can't argue with that. And maybe this pandemic, maybe there will be some bright spots coming out of that, because, you know, I started reading a lot more, truthfully. I've always been a decent reader, but I've started reading a lot more. I've probably read about 30, 35 books this year. Mm-hmm. And in reading the World Made by Hand series, lots of talk about how people are making homemade cider. Lots of talk about, you know, like Robert Earl making furniture, you know, it's being the local carpenter. And I've started making some furniture. Has a lot of right angles, by the way. You're not going to see this, you know, even.
Yeah, it's hard to build musical instruments in boats, you know, with all those curves, no straight lines.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's nothing but right angles, but I cover up the flaws with Mexican tiles that I buy off Amazon.com. And this week I have started my first batch of cider. And it's sitting there. I'm trying to get it to ferment right now, and I think I might have boiled the yeast or killed it somehow. But Jim, I got to tell you, you kind of spurred me to start making some cider, and if it turns out any good, we're going to break some laws. I'm going to ship a bottle of it to you up there in New York. But
Thank you.
this pandemic has been forcing. I know a lot of people have been taking it. They're doing things differently. They're not watching as much things like professional sports. They've developed new hobbies, and they're being a little bit more creative. And I've long maintained that the world needs more creative people than it needs business majors with a C- average. So I think that is actually one of the good things that's coming out of the pandemic is hopefully we'll be able to hold on to a little bit more of our creativity that we've gotten during the lockdowns. Are there any beacons of light out there for you? Am I right now with what's going on?
I think it pays for people. I think it pays for people to remember that societies are emergent organisms, and that societies are self-organizing. You know, a lot of people are looking for top-down solutions. You know, if we can only do this, if we can only have this policy. That's not really how it works. What happens is that reality presents a society with circumstances, and that society then responds. So the circumstances we're going to be presented with is the failure of most of the things that are organized at the giant scale, whether they're giant universities or giant governments or giant global corporations or long distribution chains or what have you. And all of that tells me that reality is telling us to get more local, to downscale the activities, to gain more skills, and skills that matter in the locality that we're in, that are based on the regional differences that we all have, and that the society will eventually reorganize itself. The problem is that where the journey to that new disposition of things is a very deep, steep, and rather harsh one, and it's going to produce a certain amount of friction and probably a certain amount of disorder. Yeah. So the big question for a lot of people is, how do we skate through this disorder and come out the other end whole?
All right, now I'm going to throw this at Sam Clement now. Now, Jim, I've been asking you the question. I'm going to ask this question of Sam Clement. It's not, Sam, you're not running for this, but I'm going to tell you. Here you have got a baby boomer and then a Gen X. We're sitting around talking, and here you are, Gen Z. You know, it's okay for us to be old and crotchety, I guess, but you're Gen Z. What do you think about what Jim and I have just been talking about? What are the bright things moving forward for someone of your generation?
You know, Jim, you probably don't know it as much as John does, but John and I usually agree on most things. I'm more of an old soul than I may appear by my age, and so, I mean, without just trying to repeat what you just said, I think there's something to it, and I think there's something to not just focusing on how a large government can kind of fix all of our problems. And I think you said it pretty poetically, you know, we need to focus on smaller and focus on local. And I mean, I think that's the biggest dispersion we're seeing amongst the youth is a lot of people are putting their faith in a bigger, larger government to fix any sort of issue.
I got to say that, you know, a lot of younger people have never seen any other things work any other way except at the giant level. You know, yeah. they're subject to giant fast food chains, giant retail chains, giant this, giant that, giant universities. They've never known anything on the smaller scale. So, yeah. You know, you can't really blame them for not being able to imagine it.
I guess that's where history comes in, and the beauty of that.
I think it's very hard for people to even remember or imagine what daily life was like, you know, 150 years ago, when we didn't have all of the, you know, the technological stuff and the high energy stuff, there's an excellent chance that a lot of that stuff's going away. You know, it's not a permanent installation of the human condition. It's with us and has been with us in recent decades, you know, for a certain set of reasons that may stop, you know, being there. And we got to be prepared for a different way of life.
Well, the avalanche of debt and the avalanche of intrinsically worthless paper money isn't helping us out terribly much. Eventually, we'll have to pay for some of that, either through collapse or just a complete standstill of economic progress at some point.
I don't think there's a standstill, John. I think that you're either expanding or contracting, and we're heading into a contraction. Contraction is not necessarily death, but it is a journey that takes you to a certain place, and we've got to be cognizant of that.
Man, it's hard to argue with that. That's very well reasoned. And here we are at the end of today's Trading Perspectives. And as always, Jim, we give all of our guests an opportunity to tell a little bit more about themselves, something that we haven't covered. And there you have it. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and I'm going to be quiet for a second.
All right. I don't have a whole lot to say about that, except it's most important for your listeners and for citizens of this country to remember that finding a way to lead a purposeful life is really about the most important thing you can do. A lot of that will depend on the relationships that you have and that you make with the people around you. Creating a social network is a construction job that you have to take seriously as a task, and you have to attend to it, and you have to keep on working at it. And that's something that we're going to have to do more and more. And I wish your listeners good luck with that purposeful journey to the new way of things.
Jim, that is an awesome way for us to end this. But however, I always give Sam the opportunity to have the last word. So
I don't know how I'm going to say it any better than that.
And I agree. And Jim, thank you so much for your time today. We really do appreciate your insight and your thoughts. Obviously, a very intelligent individual. And by all means, go out to his website and take a look around. It's a lot of fun, a lot of good things to buy out there. And I can't, while Jim has written a ton of good books, and I've ordered a few more of them off of Amazon right now, I would strongly advise everyone out there who's listening to this to pick up A World Made by Hand to start off the series and get to reading some fun literature. It's absolutely a lot of fun. So, Jim, again, thank you. And that's all we've got to do. Y'all take care.